Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to this special edition of Food for Thought with Crown Royal, uh, the Vice Presidential Debate Edition. um, I thought about actually canceling and rescheduling and doing it tomorrow or later this week or something. Then I realized, no, I'm just the opening act for y'all. I can get y'all warmed up for what you want to actually see on the debate in some sense of when you start talking about, politics. So this is a politics evening, and just like, most rap groups and all kinds of performers need an opening act, I'm just an opening act for Pence and Senator Harris tonight. What we're going to discuss tonight is a topic near and dear to my heart and maybe near and dear to a lot of y'all that we don't deal with and we don't actually discuss. Is we're talking about reparations. And reparations is basically payment, for service rendered during slavery times that we never actually received. And I know reparations is a very touchy subject because a lot of people don't actually see, a lot of people on one side that don't look like us feel as though they're not obligated to put their tax money into paying the descendants of slavery because they didn't actually themselves own any slaves, and they feel as though they may not actually gotten any type of achievement or any progression from the slave trade, and that was something that they weren't involved in or their families wasn't involved in. Whereas though 75% of black people, only 75% of black Americans actually do believe that we do deserve some type of reparations. And it can come from different factors. A lot of people talk about a direct payment to the 40 million descendants of slavery. And it's actually a lot of legislation that's going around the country in certain states. For instance, California just passed a law to actually look into a probe to look into the possibility of reparations and how it will work based on the way California treated black people during that time. And let's get this in our heads so there's no misconception. We often think that slavery was just in the South. Now, slavery may have been in the South where as though it was purely legalized, but let's be true to understand that states that didn't actually have like the slave trade or things of that nature, or maybe wasn't quote unquote slave states in the North and maybe in Western territories, they still did allow people that owned slaves to come into those states and actually have their slaves with them. It was a lot of different laws from state to state. Like for instance, like George Washington got around his slaveholding issue in Pennsylvania because you were only allowed to have a slave or a person in servitude for 6 months continuously at one time. And if after 6 months they will become free. So what he did when it came time for that 6 months is he would have his wife take them slaves down south for a few days. So whereas though that 6 months continual would be broken. Now, I'm here to tell you and actually take America to court because I believe in all the evidence that I have found out in the last couple weeks over what's going on for the last hundreds of years, we as black people are and do deserve some type of reparations. And we can quarrel and discuss how and why and how those payments will be actually sent to us. I'm open to that. I have no problem with that. And then at the end of the show, I'm actually going to give you my specific position on how we can actually work that out. Because let's not argue on the details. Let's deal with the fact that people that are descendants of slaves are deserve payment. Period. That's the first thing. We can we can get to the other things once we get everybody on board, or at least a majority of people we need to get on board. Case number one, when we're talking about slavery, and we look at, we don't even actually track certain things from the time that we were under colonial rule. So from 1619, when we actually got here, it's not even to 1776, because America actually didn't exist until 1776. But let's look at all the deaths and the lynchings and things that took place even after we were supposedly set free. I'm not going to get into the whole details of right now about all the work that was done. Let's go talk about the massacres and the killings that came, that was basically from white supremacies even after slavery and up to the day. From 1882 to 1968, over 3,400 lynchings were permitted. Now, originally, lynchings weren't a thing that was done to just exclusively black people or runaway slaves. It was a lot of white people that actually did get lynched, because it was just a mob mentality, and people didn't actually trust policing in the earlier times, because policing was not too efficient. But people, lynching doesn't just fall into hanging. Firing squads. Some people were forced to jump off bridges. Some people were dragged under cars. People were burnt alive. These were all things, and a lot of times it was these were black people that were falsely accused of, you know, looking at a white woman, or a lot of times it was because of jealousy, because black people were starting to strive and actually have more things than their white counterparts. And these, I know we talk about, and I know a lot of people probably understand, they know about here about Tulsa and Rosewood. These things were not exclusive to them. We can go back to in the 1800s. I learned this 1873 in Colfax, Louisiana. Over 150 black men were killed by white people with guns and cannons, and set people on fire. Why? Because in Colfax, Louisiana, these people were actually having their own cities, and they wind up, because of this was during Reconstruction, they start getting their own politicians in place, and white people got upset because they were doing good and doing better than them. We look at the daggone coup of 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina. A lot of people don't know about this. Wilmington, North Carolina, because you got to also understand, remember when slavery was actually abolished, a lot of the states down south was majority black people. That's why when the Constitution, they actually only counted black people as 3/5 of a man, because they didn't want to give so much power to these southern states, because South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, a lot of these states were majority black people enslaved. So when they got their freedom, they were in a majority. In Wilmington, North Carolina, it was just over 300 people were killed. This was in 1898. It was overthrown. They overthrew the government because it was 59% black. They had three black people on their city council, and these people had houses, they had they had businesses, they had churches, and they were actually quote unquote living the American dream. And these white people actually one day just went in and totally massacred the town and took it over because they were doing so well. These is atrocities. Rosewood, 1921. Another atrocity, whereas though, again, these were people that took and gained land after the Civil War and worked it and built their own societies, and they were doing better than their white counterparts, and they were jealous. The fight in Rosewood, where over another 150 people were killed, and John Singleton did a movie on it, was based on a white woman saying that she was attacked by a black man. And many of these things were always been unfounded. But you know what the biggest thing? You could always use white virtue and these people trying to take what's ours and are actually having something more than us. And it was jealousy. Not even to mention the Red Summer in 1919. Do you want to know where the civil rights, where all the people from the civil rights came from? When it was in the 50s and 60s, these were generations of people that popped up from the Red Summer in 1919. Because in 1919, it went from all the way from Arkansas, Annapolis, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Syracuse, New York, and Chicago. Thousands of black people were slaughtered that whole summer because of upward mobility. This fell off right towards this was around the Depression. But these things, and the same thing when we talk about Tulsa in 1921. Now, all these things came about because what happened? Anybody know? And I'm pretty sure a lot of us always heard about the 40 acres and a mule. Now, that was actually real. It was true. A lot of people think it was just some false thing that it'd be like, oh, I want my 40 acres and a mule. But in all actuality, that was actually put in place by General right after the Civil War. And the general did a field order, a special field order number 15, whereas though it said that these Negroes are freed slave men now were actually able to get up to 40 acres of the land that they actually worked as slaves. And when this took effect, black people start doing well for themselves. And a lot of people don't realize that actually took place. And the problem was, was a broken promise, because General William Sherman put this in place. But what happened was, when Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Jackson actually reversed all this ownership back to their white owners. So they took your land back that was rightfully yours by law. And during this time in South Carolina, Georgia, the Florida coast, and Mississippi, during these times, over the years, over 15 million acres of land was given to black people, and they were prospering. But the problem was, a lot of times they were sharecroppers, or they were run into problems whereas though by unfair practices by the bank, they wind up losing their property. And then when the recession hit in 1919, around 1920, all this black ownership was ripped apart and was taken from you. I'm sorry. Aren't we owed something for that? Not even to mention, we built this country. Now I didn't, not with my hands, but people that look like me and my forefathers did. It's so many things that we built that we never got compensated for. And I'm gonna tell you what they did about that. For instance, what we built the nation. And the whole you talk about Washington D.C. and why Washington D.C.'s nickname is Chocolate City, maybe because it was majority of black people, but slaves built that whole thing. Slaves built the White House. And they call it the People's House, Black People's House. White House was built between 1719 and 1800. The White House was built by guess how many people? Five slaves. The architect James Malbin had 4 slaves and his assistant had 1 that he owned. So 5 slaves built the White House over 8 years. James Malbin was actually paid estimated $60 a year for each slave for their work. So over 8 years' times, he was paid $60 a year. What does that $60 actually compensate to today? $83 million. That's $83 million that is owed to those slave labor. Not to mention the slaves rebuilt the executive part of the mansion after the War of 1812 when it was burnt down. And guess who worked in the White House moving forward after that? Because Johnson and Madison and several other slave-owning presidents had slaves working on as the staff there. The U.S. Capitol was built it took 1793 to 1801 to build. That was built by slaves. In all actuality, Philip Reed was a slave who actually made the Statue of Freedom that sits atop of the Capitol, a black man. He was paid supposedly $1.25 a day. But majority slaves did all the work on that, even any type of the special skills in plastering. They had another gentleman that was supposed to do it, but he was in France. So this man, Philip Reed, who was a slave, was the only one that had the actual expertise to actually make that statue out of a plastic mold. The Smithsonian Institute was also built by slaves. Do we want to move up to the north? Wall Street was built by slaves. In 1653 it took them some time, but Wall Street was actually part of the slave trade. That was the initial collateral that actually created the stock exchange that it is today. People always get the misconception that people owned slaves. Companies owned slaves. Trinity Church in New York, the original Trinity Church, built by slavery. Fort Sumter in South Carolina, built by slavery. Georgetown University. Georgetown University was founded by Jesuit priests. The Jesuit priests actually sold 272 slaves in order to pay for the school to be built. Today, the 272 slaves were equivalent to about $3.3 million. Georgetown University campus would not be there. Priests owned slaves and they sold them to build the university. And do you know what we got out of it? In 2012, they admitted to their bullshit and they just said we would give some administrative reprieves to people that were descendants of the slaves that were in question. So you get to go to the fucking school at a discount. UNC at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. That was built by slaves. Thomas Jefferson's home in Virginia, which is a beautiful home. We already know about Thomas Jefferson and his ordeal with slavery and things of that nature, but that beautiful home was built by slaves. Montpelier was built in 1760. It's a beautiful Georgia mansion of James Madison and the Madison family that was built by slaves. Our descendants built these beautiful things. I'm not even going to get into the fact about, well, I'm going to get into it now. Fuck it. We're going to get into it now. People want to sit here and say, I didn't get anything from the slave. I never owned slaves. My people didn't own slaves. Why should I have to pay my tax money to give to these people who are descendants of slaves? And why should they get these things just because of the color of their skin? Oh, really? I say this. Let's talk about the American corporations that are vibrant and strong today. And they made their initial grounds based on slavery. Lehman Brothers. Anybody know Lehman Brothers? Huh? Lehman Brothers, slave trade. They used to sell insurance policies on slaves, and they used to actually these places took slaves as leverage and collateral to make loans. Aetna Insurance, we know, issued life insurance policies on slaves. Ready? You ready? This on? JP Morgan Chase. Hey, hi. Hey, Jamie Dimon. Slaves. Built on the slave trade. Used them as collateral, as finances. I found this out this week and it fucked me up because it's my bank. Citizens Bank. Citizens Bank was slave trade. Citizens Banks actually owned Canal Bank of Louisiana. Canal Bank of Louisiana actually took 13,000 slaves as collateral, right? So they can give loans. And you know what else they did? They wind up taking 1,250 of these slaves for themselves when these owners defaulted on their loans. New York Life, Wachovia, which is now Wells Fargo, Rothschild and Sons Bank of London. All of these places and these that are here today, over the last 15 years, they done sent out little statements and said, we realized we were culpable in these things at our founding, and these places built their wealth off of free labor. So don't tell me what we are not owed. These people, this is not in a hypothetical. These places are still here today. These are Fortune 500 companies. These are thriving, and they basically are here because they used people's hard labor and broke their back and made a fucking profit. Norfolk Southern was slave owners. They've rented 108 30. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Let me get my shit together. I'm sorry. Norfolk Southern is a railroad company, and this is what I'm talking about. A lot of these companies, a lot of times, didn't own slaves, but they rented slaves to do the work to build the railroads to actually. Let's talk about back in the 17 and 1800s. We ain't had no cars. It was horse, buggy, and carriage. But when you where you get, who do you think built these fucking railroads across America? Slaves did. They would pay $180 a year for slaves to come out to about $3,400 a day today. Canadian National Railroad, when they had to go over because you know why? You know what happened? The Civil War was bad for business. Don't let these motherfuckers tell you that the Civil War was about state rights. And it was about the financial stability of southern states and their commodity of free labor. Canadian National Railroad values their losses at $199,000 because of the Civil War. That would have been $2.2 million today. $2.2 million. They lost because of the Civil War, and they didn't have their free labor. So many companies would be on the verge of extinction and bankruptcy. But once they started putting in the slave labor, the profits went up. Because they would actually 10 to 15 or 20% more in profits because they had this free labor in textiles, cotton, sugar, all these plantations. All this took place. And companies just continue to grow. Because once they would put in, a lot of companies would just say, all right, let's go to a plantation and let's rent these slaves, and they give the slave owner X amount of dollars, and now they got this free labor to run and actually build their highways, build their roads, build their train tracks. And they pocketed and profited, and it actually done snowballed to today. Why black people don't got shit as a whole? Because you never was actually given the opportunity to have shit. When you actually did when you actually were sharecroppers and you actually did have land and you actually did make an effort and you were doing well, they burnt your shit down. Or they used unfair practices with redlining and other just falsehoods to steal your land and take your businesses away from you if you actually got the business in the first place. But we don't deserve no money. We don't deserve reparations. I keep hearing the South lost. I always hear the South lost. Fucking South didn't lose. South didn't lose when it's 800 daggone Confederate monuments around the country. South didn't lose. America is the South. I want y'all to realize that. Let's move on to some shit. I'm sorry, I got a little out of control for a minute. The wage gap in America has been very extenuous over the last 20 years, to the point where as though it didn't matter if you had a high school diploma, if you had if you had a college degree, or even have an advanced degree. No matter what, it's been actually separating between black and white Americans crazy over the last 20 years. Black people was doing better in 2000 than they are in 2020. At the same levels of education that you were at in 2000, you doing worse than 2020. That's why, for me, I went to college. I went to some college, but I was able to not finish college and go into my profession and actually make a good living back in the late 90s. My kids can't do that today. A high school diploma, that ain't even getting you a seat at the table. That's why all three of my sons is in higher education, because the tide has changed. The gap has changed. If you look at the graph, it actually tells you, even at the same level that you are with a white person, at it's still, you are behind on great percentages, and it's actually been growing. But the South lost, and we don't deserve no reparations, even though it's systematic. And we always hear this. And I done said it so many times on my program, and you probably see it so many times on the news, and you probably done blocked it out, and your white friends don't want to hear it because they don't want to have this discussion. Or if you white and you listening, looking at me, you probably don't want to have this discussion. The systematic, which means this is the program. This is the system that been put into place. So whereas though ultimately white is right and you black, you not getting shit, because it's designed that way. The wage gap is designed that way. And people probably sitting there saying, I'm not racist. Fuck if you racist or not. I ain't here to decide if people are racist or not. I ain't here to try to figure out what's in a motherfucker's heart. I don't care what's in your heart. All I want, and what my people want, it's the same thing that you want. Well, it's sitting there in the fucking 14th Amendment, which is life, liberty, property, equal access, and equal protection under the law. Bitch better have my money. Y'all understand what that means? That go back to the 70s. That go back to Superfly. That go to the fight. Bitch better have my money. Not some of it, not half, all my shit. I say that because I know for a fact we owed. And we can say, and I'm going to tell you this much, because I got about 15 minutes. Because I'm going to end this a little bit early, because we got to go see Sister Kamala tonight. But when my 15 minutes now, I'm going to roll into my soapbox. America don't want you to have reparations. Listen to me. Your problem is with America. My problem was with America. My problem you ain't got no problems with Katie. You ain't got problems with Beth. You don't got no problem with your next door neighbor or somebody that you share a desk with or you work the floor with. And if you are one of these people and you watching right, our beef is not with you. I don't care what's in your heart. Our problem is with America. 435 representatives, 100 senators, a president, and 9 motherfuckers on the Supreme Court. On the federal level. That's who we got a problem with. And you can have problems with your local. We can do this on this. We can do this on a local level. Shit, Ashland, North Carolina, they already done put in it for. They said we don't. They know they done fucked up, and they done put in plans to actually put policies in place for their town to actually help and to do something about black schooling and better interest to healthcare and giving tax breaks to open black businesses. Little Ashland, North Carolina, just last week, because it's Wednesday. Yeah, just last week, the state of California passed a bill to actually do research on the reparations part and actually break down and see how California can do better and to their black communities before because of reparations from slavery times and their descendants. Because just because California wasn't a slave state, they allowed slavery. They allowed slaves to be, and they actually brought slaves in to work their lands. Yeah. Why do we need reparations? And why don't they want to give it to us? Germany. Germany figured out. Y'all remember World War II? Y'all remember that guy Hitler? And you remember what they did to the Jewish people with the Holocaust and exterminating the Jewish people? Germany wanted to actually come back to the table and actually be looked upon as a world power. So what did they do? They reconciled with they shit. They said we were wrong. And they passed laws. And they passed laws, for one, you can't fly the swastika at all in Germany. It's illegal. From my knowledge, the name Adolf is banned from being given in Germany. And they said, we are sorry. As a nation, we have these atrocities. Please, we want to be better. When did America reconcile? They don't want you to have that money. Reason why they want you know why they don't want you to have that money? They gave Japan money. They got the Japanese, because back in World War II, I'm gonna give you a little history. Back in World War II, FDR rounded up all the Japanese Americans, it's citizens or not, got all rounded up. These were teachers, business owners, anybody. Because we were at war with Japan, he wanted them all put in concentration camps. No due process. No court. Nothing. You know what Ronnie did, right? Ronald Reagan did back in the 80s. When, you know what? Japanese actually started getting technologically advanced with their little, their radios and TVs and things of that nature. And America needed a piece of that fucking pie. So what he did was he got there and said, we need to apologize to the Japanese for the ultimate disrespect of their internment camps back in World War II. And what we will do is actually give any living descendants a payment of $20,000 directly to them for these atrocities. South Africa. Even South Africans, they had a reconciled commission because they had been using apartheid for decades. I'm not going to tell you they actually studied segregation in America to actually fortitude how they wanted to run their societies and actually have apartheid run. They actually looked at the Jim Crow and the different laws that we had in America to fortify apartheid. But when they wanted to come head first with their racist past and wanted to be better and actually have the majority of black people that were the majority in the country actually have some say in their country, they came to the table and had a reconcile commission and they admitted to all their atrocities. They would have policemen sit in front of daggone these citizens that they had harassed, beaten, and some throughout the years killed their family. And they said, yes, I did it. I'm sorry. And I did it because of the state. Because they had to heal. America has never apologized to the descendants of slavery. Even though Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader today, said that several years ago, he said slavery is America's original sin. But he also says, well, there's no one alive that today that actually benefited or owned slaves, so why should citizens be punished today? Fuck you, Mitch. Because guess what? All the policies that America has actually had in place for all these years is based on the fact of slavery. All your riches come from slavery. That capital that you sit in every day and you come onto the floor was built by slaves. That house, that's supposedly the people's house, that 45 sits in right now, was built by slaves. These railroads, everything. Now here comes the fun part. This is the part that I've been waiting for all day. The fun part is, how are we supposed to do this? P say, rapped to me last week, he said, well, wait a minute, everybody not descended from slavery. Maybe, some people from Jamaica and people from Haiti, they not direct descendants from American slavery. I would say the Haitians, you already know who your colonizers are and who you got your problems with. You know you got a problem with France. But let me run through the numbers. This shit gonna fuck you up because y'all probably sitting there like, hey, how can we calculate this? And it's a lot of people, a lot of different ways. Now, check this Newsweek article out that was just July 17th of this year by Jacob Jarvis. And this is with contributions from a lot of different economists and historians. People say anywhere from $12 to $13 million, $13 trillion in 2018. And that was stemming from different promises of land and the different slaves from the time of 1776 until end of slavery in 1865. They were saying somewhere around $12 to $13 trillion. That would be the cost of payments, which is actually, all right. Now this is based on the 40,909,000 black non-Hispanic descendants. Okay. Now, what would that come to? If they use the wage-based cost with interest, black people will be owed over $6.2 quadrillion, which comes out to the 40 million black descendants of slavery. everybody is owed $151 million. Now that could be a little extreme because all of us are not direct descendants of slavery. I mean, I know I am because I've been to the plantation where I'm from. I know I seen the plantation. My last name, the name that I carry, the name that I gave my sons was on that motherfucking plantation down in Ticknell, Georgia. So I know where I'm from. And that's no, and also I had a DNA test done, and I'm 80%, 80 some odd percent from West Africa, the Congo, Nigeria. That's neither here nor there. We get to that. Bob Johnson, y'all knew who Bob Johnson was. He was the BET founder. Bob Johnson stated, and he had people actually do research in this thing. He said it would be about $14 trillion that was owed for wages to the people that are descendants of slaves, which actually come out to around, with the 14 trillion, not that 6.2 quadrillion thing that other people were using, that'd be about $350,000 directly to everybody. And that, he said, let's do this because it is a significant, we already went through the wealth gap, but this would help the wealth gap between African Americans and white Americans. The Brookings Institute supports these things. I'm going to tell you what I think. I don't believe, and people can disagree with me, I got a couple more. I don't believe any direct payments should actually be made to anyone. And I'm going to tell you why. And the Brookings Institute, I read their paper, and this makes a lot of sense. Because if you give people direct payments anywhere, let's say the smallest amount, the smallest minuscule amount was $11.9 trillion that'd be divided and saved. If everybody, the 40 million black people in America was, you would get about $231,000 directly to you. Everybody, $231,000. What is that going to do? Nothing. Because you don't have any black infrastructure. You don't have many black businesses. So all you're going to do is not going to stay in the black community, because when you purchase many things, it's going to be given to other people. Now you might sit there and say, nah, well, if I do this, I can actually I can start me a business of this, that, and other. No. You can't if the system is still blocked for you to get credit. If the system doesn't change, I don't care if you have $200,000. They can still block you from being in their neighborhood and buying a house. They can still block you from having to buying a business or actually developing something because you don't have the infrastructure. No direct payments. And when you do the no direct payments, then we don't have to deal with the issue of, are you your ancestry? We should demand in tax breaks, change the system with redlining, give small business loans, actually put money into HCB, black colleges. I'm all everywhere. Actually designate state schools in every state for where as though if a black child graduates high school, they have an opportunity to go to this particular state school, even if it's a black school or not, just a state school at discounted prices or close to free. I'm sorry, that was my alarm. I'm supposed to stop, but I ain't finished. I'm gonna do me a couple more minutes. Hey, Deidre, I see what you're saying, but I'm on a roll. If you do this, if you actually get tax breaks for black communities and you invest money into their schools and you invest money into their society, whereas though they have better medical access to medical places. I did not know, and I'm ignorant to this, and I'm sorry. I didn't know my mortality rate is actually the black mortality rate is so high in America. I had no ideas with that. You could actually the direct payments would not make us prosper because we'll be spending it somewhere else and they will be getting that money that we had. We have to worry about investing in our own communities. So actually by having these things in writing and actually having these policies in place so the money actually goes to black communities where as though black people live in, then you can build the palaces up. That's like they should have. The only thing that I would say that it could be some type of payment is where as though it was a suggestion about baby bonds. And the baby bond suggestion was like any descendant basically of slavery. Well, when a child is born, they would have get some type of bond of like a $25,000 baby bond that would actually mature over the 20 years or so when it's time for them to actually go to college that they would actually have this money or I'd rather have whereas though it is in writing and is the system is working because what is going to happen if you wait for something like that, it's going to take generations and generations. You can actually put things in place right now to make people's lives better. Yes, but the only way you can actually own your own businesses if you actually have the opportunity. And that's my point. These laws and these segregationist policies, they need to be ripped out. We need to be getting these small business loans that's directed straight to black entrepreneurs. That's what I'm talking about. Actual straight policies that's going right to them. Because I know people that love that want business. I got an idea from business. I'm talented, but guess what? My credit score ain't the right credit score. And it only take about a little bit this, that, and other to straighten it out. But what if my credit score and everything else is still in play, but they still don't give me the right loan or they don't give it to me at the right percentage because the system has already been made to fuck me. These things are owed to us. Black universities should be palaces. Public schools, fuck charter schools, fuck private schools. Public schools should be fucking palaces. And they should be teaching our children exactly the real of what happened in America and also putting in place these things so whereas though we won't have to try to run away from our own communities and teaching and try to go to a charter school or give it to a private school when we should just have it invested. Why do the food deserts in our communities? All these things can be rectified with a stroke of votes in a pen. When real commitment of money is that's putting your money with your mouth with where your mouth is. That's not pandering just for a vote. That is true reparations and something that I, my children, my children's children can see moving in the future. It's not something that can just be taken away. I'm not saying let Caucasians manage our money. I'm saying you actually, in order to actually get the investments, you need to actually have something written on the books. And whereas though it's actually going to our specific community. You're saying you want a direct payment so you can do it yourself, but you can have the money. But what if the system is still made the same way? It's not going to give you. They're not going to give you. They'll just take your money, or you. Are they not going to give you the credit to actually, or the permits, or the permits to build in this particular area and things of that nature? I'm sorry, we've run up. It's 8:56. The vice president debate is about to come out. I want to thank you for all of everybody that's watching. Hey, Holiday, Alicia, double standard. Deidre makes some great points as usual. And I like that you don't agree with me because guess what? But we having a conversation. So a lot of times people that don't look like us should need to have. You shouldn't. You sh- no, I didn't say that, Deidre. Don't do that. I didn't say that at all. Now that sounds like something they would say. You twisted my words. Anyway, um, I want to thank y'all because I appreciate everybody, and I want to do one thing that I usually don't do. It today is kind of like a, I wouldn't say it's a special day to me, but it's October 7th, and October 7th is kind of a day for me. Today is the anniversary of my father's death, and I kind of hope that he sees me today and doing something uh, that I'm passionate about. And to be honest, me and my dad didn't always have the greatest relationship as I got older, but I know for a fact that I am who I am because of him. And without him, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have the children that I have. And so I just wanted to, give a little shout out to my father tonight. And I want to give a shout out to y'all for being here. And good night, and class is dismissed.